Chime isn't just smarter banking, it's the most rewarding way to bank. So join the millions who are banking fee-free. Fee-free ATMs, no overdraft fees, plus savings that grow faster with a 3.75 APY, 9 times higher than the national average. Just head to chime.com/achiever. That's chime.com/achiever. It only takes a few minutes to sign up. Summer's almost here, and I bet that you have big plans. Take your vacation without worrying if you can afford it or if it will affect your future financial goals. Monarch is the personal finance app that tracks everything: account, investments, savings goals, and spending. Get your first year of Monarch for half off. That's just $50 with promo code Achiever. Go to monarch.com, enter code Achiever. Quince has luxury looking stuff that is well made and chic, from everyday basics to things to mix it up, all priced at 50 to 80% less than similar brands. So refresh your everyday with luxury you'll actually use. Head to quince.com/achiever for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/achiever. Shopify is your partner for starting a beautiful, usable, successful online business. It's time to turn the what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 a month trial today at shopify.com/anxiousachiever. $1 a month. Just go to shopify.com/anxiousachiever. Hi, I'm Maura Aarons-Mele, host of The Anxious Achiever. Today, I'm going to bring you one of our most downloaded and one of my most favorite episodes from our archives. It's a classic. The Anxious Achiever has been at it for a long time. We have over 300 episodes. And honestly, they're all still more relevant than ever. You may hear details in this episode that remind you it's from another time, but I guarantee that the advice you get will be as crisp and meaningful and the stories as resonant as before. If you have a favorite episode of the show, let me know. I'd love to air it again or even re-record it for you fresh. Enjoy this classic Anxious Achiever episode. Being called anxious, thinking of yourself as neurotic, blaming an issue you're having on imposter syndrome, your first instinct is probably, oh, these are negatives. But what if they're not? I love the work of today's guest. Basima Tewfik is an assistant professor of work and organization studies at the MIT Sloan School of Management. And she's done studies on all kinds of phenomena around the social self at work. But like me, she really wants us to understand that the things we think are, quote, wrong with us can actually be our gifts. Today, she'll share her findings, especially about how we think of ourselves and imposter feelings. Tewfik's research finds that employees with more frequent workplace imposter thoughts may also be seen as more interpersonally effective at work and reap benefits. A sneak preview: not everything we think is a negative or a deficiency really is. But first, we start our conversation with me asking Tewfik why her work focuses so much on finding the upsides in the things we think of as negative or bad.
I think we're really hard on ourselves. And so, or at least maybe I'm really hard on myself. And so a lot of my research is a little bit of research. And I think one of the really important things when we're thinking about phenomenon that tend to have sort of negative connotations, it's really important to get a holistic picture, because without a holistic picture, not only are you sort of experiencing the downsides of the particular phenomenon, but you're also experiencing the negative emotions that come with it, which make you feel even worse. And I think there's sort of this, we're human. We're going to have times where we don't feel so great about ourselves. There's going to be certain things about our personalities or certain intrusive thoughts that we have. And it's really important to put context on that so that we're not just, knocking ourselves down further when we're in those moments in which those traits or those thoughts are really manifesting.
I'm working on a keynote called How to Be Your Own Best Friend.
I love that.
Because I think you're right, especially those of us who are high achieving and tend to be, and this is a word you used, a little bit neurotic. Why did you use the word neurotic in your research?
In the academic paper, I actually use the more positive side of neuroticism. So I use the word emotional stability. But in one of my papers, I really looked at this phenomenon of engagement variability. So, this idea that we don't consistently engage in our work. For most people, we probably are going to think that's bad. And that's what I find, along with my co authors, Daniel Kim and Shafali Patel, that essentially the more you vacillate in your engagement, the worse it is for performance. But I also had this thought of like, it's probably not everybody who's sort of experiencing this relationship. And this is where I thought of neuroticism. And neuroticism, when we think about it emotionally, we think about it, in terms of mood swings, in terms of jumping from one thing to another in a very emotionally charged manner. But there's also some really interesting cognitive properties with neuroticism. And so one of the reasons I was interested in that is to really zoom in on those cognitive properties, which is specifically people who are neurotic are really good at jumping. They're used to it. And so in something where you're inconsistently engaging, you're sort of in your job sometimes, but not all the time, maybe being neurotic could actually be pretty functional in that situation. And that's what we find across 3 studies.
I want to share a thought I had also reading this, but I wanted to frame it maybe in the very applicable to this show. Someone who experiences a lot of anxiety, who runs hot, neurotic.
Yeah.
What's the advantage in this framework at work?
Let me actually take a step back to this idea of bad phenomena. We generally think things are bad because we think about it in emotional terms. So even the word anxiety that you just used, it's a very emotional term. But all of these emotions tend to have also cognitive sides that people really ignore. And when you focus on those cognitive sides, that's where you can see the functional nature. With neuroticism, people who are neurotic tend to be people who are highly anxious. They tend to come together. But if we really focus on what I was saying with the cognitive properties, we can see that people are jumping back and forth. That's something they're naturally good at doing. And so in a situation in which, we're dealing with work environments where not only what I studied, which is engagement variability and consistently engaging, but even, perhaps you're getting a text message in the middle of a meeting. That is something actually anxious people, yes, you feel that anxiety, but you're also potentially used to jumping from one thing to another. And so that's where it could be functional.
Interesting. Are there other cognitive properties of, quote, bad emotions that we should think differently about?
Well, there's 2 that I focused on in my research that are, I wouldn't necessarily call them emotions, but I would think about them as phenomena that we have very emotional definitions attached to that. Okay. So the one that we talked about is neuroticism. But the other one that a lot of my research focuses on what is popularly known as imposter syndrome, or what I call workplace imposter thoughts. And when you look at the research on how people have defined imposter syndrome in the literature, and also even if you sort of go to Google or look at sort of popular discourse, people often talk about it as if it's a fear of being found out. But when you actually think about the origins of the phenomenon and what scholars coalesce around the big defining feature, it's actually this idea that you think other people think you're smarter than you think you are. So it's really this like cognition that might lead you to be afraid of being found out and maybe think that you don't belong and all that not so great stuff. But that cognition also signals to you that other people actually think you're good. So maybe there's something good about what you're doing. Maybe there's something about your previous performance that other people are honing in on. But us as the experiencer of workplace imposter thoughts, for example, we're really focused on this fact that we're deficient. But maybe it's actually an information asymmetry story. I know a lot more about all the things that I didn't get right than other people now. And so I'm going to be a lot harder on myself as a critic when it comes to any type of performance episode, right? But other people aren't really seeing that. And so that's kind of going back to our earlier discussion of like these sort of emotional reactions we have. Emotions are kind of, as you said, you run hot. They're the things that you sort of notice right away. But other people aren't necessarily knowing all the emotional turmoil that's going on inside. And we also have to give ourselves credit that maybe we as humans have sort of functional defense mechanisms in place to help us manage that, even if we think we're not doing it great all the time, right? But at least some of the time, especially if you're an overachiever, you're probably actually managing it better than you think.
I mean, one of the things that strikes me thinking about the imposter phenomenon. When you think about the original sort of imposter cycle in the model, it was this sense of performing to a certain standard, getting the reaction that you feel is sufficient, you did a good job, but then the feeling that, I better keep running. It's a cycle. The loop never closes of the moment of you saying, I am good. I can calm down. I don't have to work so hard.
Yeah, I definitely think that happens. But what I would sort of add to it is that you're only going to go through that cycle if you keep finding yourself in a position that you're sort of performing a stretch opportunity, or you're performing something new, something that you haven't really felt that you've excelled at in the past. And maybe people expect that you can do super well on it. The reason I say that is because if you look at the research, there does tend to be a negative correlation between experiencing this phenomenon and your age. So as you get older, people who experience what I call workplace imposter thoughts, it tends to go down. You tend to report less frequency over time. And I think part of that is we suddenly get really good at our jobs, and maybe we're not jumping up a level. And so we're not having those intrusive thoughts as much as possible, or as much as we did before. Alternatively, maybe also as we age, we don't really care what people think of us as much as we used to when we're younger.
DGAF, baby.
Yes, exactly. Like, I'm over it. I used to care a lot as a younger person. And maybe now as I'm getting older, I don't care so much. So I think there's sort of two things going on there that sort of break that cycle. And the reason I highlight that is because to me, or what sort of attracted me to this phenomenon of workplace imposter thoughts and also sometimes neuroticism is if you're experiencing these thoughts, you must be doing something right. You must have received some positive feedback that tells you that you're doing great or that other people think you're great. And you must also be challenging yourself, right? You must be putting yourself in those positions that are going to further hone your skills and further allow you to learn and grow. And so to me, I kind of think this whole message that we have of getting rid of your imposter thoughts, I'm not sure that's totally spot on. To really get rid of it, you either have to stop caring about what other people think, which, maybe that's healthy to a degree, but it's probably not healthy all the way. You could potentially become a narcissist, or it means that you're sort of not putting yourself in a position in which you're continuing to learn and grow. And I think as humans, that's really fundamental to what we're all about.
Tell us what your research finds when it comes to people who feel workplace imposter feelings and leadership and management. I think we sort of have this image that a leader would never feel like an imposter because they have to be strong. They're a leader.
Yeah. So my first paper that really looked at workplace imposter thoughts just sort of focused on the everyday employee. One of the things that I noticed when I sort of read sort of anecdotes of people who've experienced these thoughts and also looked at the original paper that first talked about this is that people talked about how others found them charming or socially skilled. And I thought that was really strange. I'm like, hey, that's a really good thing. And particularly in today's workplaces in which we're increasingly relational, it's probably really great to be interpersonally effective. So I sought to sort of figure out, is there actually this positive relationship between having more frequent workplace imposter thoughts and being more interpersonally effective? I first worked with a finance company. And I was just curious to figure out, what's the frequency of your employees having workplace imposter thoughts? And I found a positive relationship. So those employees who experienced more frequent imposter thoughts were also those employees who got rated by their supervisors as more interpersonally effective. And I was like, that's interesting. But I was like, wait a second, maybe they're interpersonally effective, but if they're actually bad at their jobs, then we probably don't care so much about this social bonus. But I found in that study that there wasn't actually a negative relationship with their actual performance. But you might think to yourself, okay, that's a great story, Basima. Like, this makes us all feel good. But the people who are rating interpersonal performance and your job performance were the same, the supervisors. So maybe there's some sort of halo effect going on or something like that. So then I was like, let's jump to a new context. I then worked with a medical school who allowed me to examine doctors in training who interact with standardized patients. And these standardized patients are essentially actors in the local area who come in and partner with the medical school, and they simulate as if they have a particular disease. And they're super standardized. So the way that they sort of learn to do this is they watch each other. They talk about how they're going to respond to questions, what their answers are going to be, their mannerisms. In fact, I sat in what I call the control room where you could see all the videos of all of the different patient rooms going on at the same time. And if a standardized patient wasn't in the patient room, they were actually in that control room with me listening in to make sure that when it was their turn, they're exactly identical. And so what's great is you have a very standard situation where you're putting all of these doctors in training into it. And so what I did is a week before these interactions, I asked doctors in training to indicate how frequently they had imposter thoughts. So how frequently did they think that others overestimated their abilities? And during the interaction, I sort of watched all of these interactions and then had the standardized patients at the end rank these doctors and how interpersonally skilled they are. And that is something they're trained to do because this is really about sort of making sure you're good at bedside manner. And then I also asked these doctors to give their diagnoses. Like, let's get an objective measure of performance here. And again, what I found is, again, those doctors who reported more frequent workplace imposter thoughts were rated by the patients as more interpersonally skilled. And when you sort of try to unpack why, what seemed to be happening is these doctors with more frequent imposter thoughts seem to like almost be compensating. So it's almost this idea of like, oh no, maybe I'm not as competent as they think I am. So I'm just going to be really other oriented. I'm going to nod a lot. I'm going to make great eye contact. I'm going to put my pen down and really listen to them. And so they're doing all these things and they're not getting the diagnoses wrong. So it's not like there was a difference in terms of did they get the diagnosis right, but they're getting rated as higher in interpersonal skill. And what's really interesting, and this isn't in the paper, but I sort of, asked these doctors afterwards, like, were you trying to be more other oriented in these interactions? It seems to be completely subconscious. They don't report that they're trying to do something differently than their non-imposter peers. And so it sort of suggests that, like, again, there seems to be this really positive benefit that's coming out of here that isn't necessarily destroying you in terms of the job performance perspective. But there's always more to the story, Maura. So I then was like, okay, let me think about this and pitching this to someone who's a little like, I'm not so sure I buy this story. So what else could I tell you to further convince you that maybe there's this interpersonal benefit? So what I did is I then went and tried to run experiments. So essentially I ran 2 experiments where you sort of induce some people to have these imposter thoughts and some people not. And the reason for this was to see if there's causality. Like maybe, okay, it's not actually that people with imposter thoughts are rated as more interpersonally effective. It's something else that they have going on that's really causing that relationship. And what I found is, again, so those participants, which were full-time employees in the US, who were induced to have more imposter thoughts, they were more other oriented. So in the scenario that I gave them, they asked more questions, which is a good indicator of how other oriented you are. And as a result of the questions they asked and answered in the hypothetical conversation, the hiring managers who were supposed to rate them rated them as more interpersonally effective. So again, there seems to be this sort of positive relationship of, hey, I'm compensating. And so people think I'm interpersonally effective. But one thing, and this jumps back to what you talked about earlier, is, okay, what's kicking off this whole thing, right? Why am I becoming more other oriented? And it actually has to do with sort of what you alluded to earlier, which is this kind of drop of self-esteem, which is like you don't feel, anxious people tend to have lower self-esteem. Neurotic people tend to have lower self-esteem. People with workplace imposter thoughts, it tends to trigger a decrease in your self-esteem. And because of that, you want to protect your self-esteem. And that's why you adopt this other oriented nature, which then leads to these downstream benefits. So when you're sort of taking a step back, this also brings us full circle to the beginning, which is you got to think about all the outcomes here. So with workplace imposter thoughts, you have well-being, which is, you can think about that as self-esteem. You have this interpersonal outcome, which is the interpersonal effectiveness. And then you have like your proficiency or performance outcome. The takeaway that I find in this paper is, it does seem to be the case that when you have imposter thoughts, you're more interpersonally effective. It doesn't seem to hurt your job, at least in the context that I studied, but it does come with a well-being cost. So if we're zooming out, I think that has a lot of practical implications.
It's almost summer. Oh my gosh. Even in New England, where we've had the worst winter, It's almost summer and I can feel all the things that I want to do in the summer. I just love to explore New England and I want to spend a little money along the way. And that's why I love Monarch because I want to plan my summer, not worry about if I can afford it. Monarch is the personal finance app that tracks everything: accounts, investments, saving goals, and spending. You can get your first year of Monarch for half off. That's just $50 with promo code Achiever. The thing that's so cool about Monarch's personal finance app is that it monitors your money so you don't have to in a really holistic way. If you want to set a savings goal or a net worth milestone, I just hit one and Monarch identified it and it felt great. And even me, anxious achiever, I got to take a sec and feel like, okay, cool, I did something. Most apps only tell you what you've already spent, right? So you can like reconcile your budget. But Monarch helps set goals, map out big purchases, and see if you're actually on track before it's too late to adjust for both your spending and your financial future. And you can get AI insights. It flags spending spikes, net worth shifts, and upcoming expenses to keep you on track. So use code Achiever at monarch.com to get your first year at half off, just $50. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code Achiever. Chime is changing the way people bank, and it's about time. You know, it hit me recently that for decades, I paid ATM fees. I paid a monthly fee to keep my checking account. I paid to use my own money. Chime isn't like that. They offer the most rewarding fee-free banking. They're not like traditional old banks that charge you overdraft and monthly fees. And they have thousands of fee-free ATMs. Again, why pay to get for your own money? Chime members can benefit from up to $1,150 in annual rewards. Again, fee-free. And it's rated 5 stars by USA Today for customer service with real humans 24/7. Chime has stacked benefits. You can get 5% cash back on a Chime card in a category of your choice, like gas, important right now, or groceries. And you get savings that grow faster with a 3.75 APY, 9 times higher than the national average. Plus, you can get premium travel perks like airport lounge access and 24/7 travel concierge included with your Chime card. My younger self would have really benefited from this. And I think about all of the money that I've spent for all these years paying to use my own money. Chime isn't just smarter banking. It's the most rewarding way to bank. So join the millions who are already banking fee-free today. Just head to chime.com/achiever. That is chime.com/achiever. It just takes a few minutes to sign up. Chime is a fintech, not a bank. Banking services for MyPay and Chime Card provided by Chime's bank partners. Optional products and services may have fees or charges. Stated annual percentage yield and cash back for Chime Prime only. No minimum balance required. Checking account ranking based on a J.D. Power survey published October 20, 2025. For more information on APY rates, MyPay, SpotMe, and travel perks, go to chime.com/disclosures. Starting something new isn't just hard. It's downright terrifying. So much work, so much faith, so much hope, so much risk goes into the thing that might not work out. Trust me, I know I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years. When I started my business, I wasn't sure what I was doing. But now, 20 years on, I know that I was right in believing in myself, despite all the fears and ups and downs. And it also helps when you have a partner like Shopify on your side to help. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Shopify is your partner for starting a beautiful, usable, successful online business. Get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify can help you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand. Accelerate your efficiency, whether you're uploading new products or trying to improve existing ones. Shopify is packed with helpful tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, even enhance your photography. And Shopify's always around to share advice with their award-winning 24/7 customer support. You can tackle all the important tasks for your online business in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or manage multiple vendors or try to figure out what platform is hosting what tool. It's all in one place, which makes your life easier and your business operations smoother, which, trust me, is a really, really big deal. And of course, there's the iconic purple Shop Pay button that is used by millions of businesses around the world. And it's why Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet. It helps boost conversions, meaning less carts going abandoned and more sales for you. So it's time to turn the what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 a month trial today at shopify.com/anxiousachiever. $1 a month. Just go to shopify.com/anxiousachiever. So, do you know the banana exercise in ACT?
No, I would like to hear more about this.
Okay, this is going to blow your mind, and I really want to know your thoughts. And I may butcher the explanation, but so Dr. Russ Harris is an Australian medical doctor who is also a big proponent of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And he tells a story about he was a young surgeon and he had terrible imposter thoughts. He writes very openly about literally cutting into someone and thinking, I'm going to mess up. Why did they hire me? I'm a terrible surgeon. Like really intrusive thoughts. Didn't seem to affect his outcomes, never got complained, never made a mistake. And then one day, he sort of had this realization that these terrible, painful thoughts were just words. And he decided to replace them with, I'm a banana. And so instead of, I'm like, this is me pretending to be a surgeon. I'm terrible. They're gonna find out. I'm gonna hurt this person, blah, blah, blah. It was, I'm a banana. I'm a banana. I'm a banana. And that was sort of a breakthrough. And now in ACT therapy, there are many, many exercises where you can look at your intrusive thoughts and repeat them to yourself, either in, I'm a failure, I'm a loser, I'm gonna get fired, or you can say, I'm a banana. You get the point.
One thing I really love about that is I feel like sometimes we're in this culture that's like replace your negative thought with a positive thought. And I'm a banana is a very neutral statement, which I think might be exactly what you need, right? Because it sort of is this idea of, okay, I'm having a negative thought. It's making me feel not so great. Let me neutralize it by not gaslighting myself and telling myself, no, I'm super great. I'm wonderful. I'm the most confident person in the world. But rather just neutralize it by just saying, okay, it's happening, but I don't have to sort of replace it with something that maybe I don't fully feel in the moment or fully think in the moment, but I'm just human. I'm operating.
Right. Or, in ACT, they would call it defusing. So a lot of us anxious people would go deeper into that and run through all the billions of reasons why we're a failure and get really deep into a bad place, which you don't want to be in. And so the banana defuses you from the thought because they're just words.
I love it. And you're right. My mind is blown. I can't wait to try that. Except I'm having anxious thoughts. I'll send you an email. I'll be like, I'm a banana, Maura. I'm a
Oh my
banana.
God. I mean, I'm a banana multiple times a day and I love bananas, but I think what's interesting, because I've had people, so I've given this example, and a very typical response I'll get is, I don't want a surgeon who thinks they're a bad surgeon. So what would your response to that be?
I mean, I think given the research I conducted, I actually realized I might actually want that person. I might want the person who's sort of thinking, oh, I'm maybe not as competent. And so I really want to make sure I nail it when it comes to the competence type of outcome. But also, I want to be kind and considerate to my patients. I think we tend to think of the classic surgeon as this person who is sort of like emotionally devoid. They're just in there to cut and do whatever it is that they need to do. And then they tell you at the end of surgery it went great or it didn't. And then they leave, right? And that's sort of the last you see them. But I think actually it's you kind of might want the person who knows that there's always more to know. such that they're kind of being very careful. They're not just sort of operating very rote.
Yeah.
I do think there's probably like you don't want too many imposter thoughts. So people have asked me, for example, is it maybe curvilinear? Like maybe there's like an optimal amount of thoughts you should have. I don't find that in my research, but I don't necessarily think that doesn't mean it's not true, right? I do think there are times where you can have so many imposter thoughts that it's just really debilitating. So maybe it's the intensity.
It's the attachment. In ACT, you would call it the attachment. So, like in my lived experience, the right amount of imposter thoughts do keep you in that I want to be better phase and probably do make, you more attuned to the response of others. But if you can achieve that level of detachment from them, like, oh, here I go again, rather than digging in and getting debilitated, probably that's the magic.
That actually resonates with sort of the practical implications that I see in the research, in part because I think for imposter thoughts and for things like neuroticism or anxiety, really the key is to sort of downregulate the negative emotions. That's what's sort of driving the well-being costs are what's sort of making this a really terrible thing to experience or to go through, right? So this idea of detachment allows you to separate yourself emotionally from what it is you're thinking, what it is you're feeling. And I think that might be the key to being able to unlock, okay, but there is also these functional things, or at least, I'm still fine. I'm still working. I'm still operating. I'm still performing at a level that's considered to be good.
Basima, I understand that you're working with comedians.
Yeah. So this study with comedians actually dates back to when I was in grad school. And the reason I always thought comedians were fascinating is because essentially, there is a chance you don't always nail it. Sometimes you're sort of being funny and you're making all the great jokes and everybody's laughing, and sometimes they're not. And in the comedian world, right, the idea of I think other people are overestimating my capabilities would be they're like, oh, you're a comedian. You must be the funniest person in the world. And so they have sort of these high expectations. So when I came to MIT, I finally got the opportunity to run the sort of dream study, thanks to MIT. And what I wanted to see is if you induced comedians to have imposter thoughts, what would happen? How creative would they be? What could we see happening? And so, I don't want to sort of preview too much about the study, but I'll give you a little bit of a taste. Essentially, what I found is that those comedians who were induced to have imposter thoughts were essentially those who ended up being more creative. And the reason for it is it seems that they sort of engaged in more sort of problem solving, sort of pondering or thinking. So specifically, the creative task that they had to do was come up with sort of creative definitions for made up words. So something like cuddle sword, something that's definitely not a real word. And then essentially I had all of these definitions rated by outside raters. So these are just people from the general public. And there seemed to be this pattern where because you have imposter thoughts, you engage in more problem solving, which leads to more creativity. That sort of kind of kicked off this whole project that I'm currently working on, which is trying to figure out, okay, but are there sometimes those moments where you're actually not going to see that creativity? And one of my sort of hypotheses there is it has to do with like the affect you're feeling, maybe the emotions you're feeling, that's going to interfere with how creative you are. And so can we figure out those opportunities to sort of dial it up so that you see that creative outcome versus those times where you're not going to see that creative outcome? And so right now, I've conducted a number of studies. So one is with essentially employees with ratings about how creative they are at work, where I follow them over 2 weeks. There's also another sort of field study with executive MBAs. And so it's all really trying to unpack of like, hey, wait a second. Maybe there's this also other bright side of having imposter thoughts. Maybe on certain days, because of your imposter thoughts, you might be more creative. What's also really interesting about this paper and something that I'm really excited about is when we talk about imposter thoughts, we really talk about it as if it's a trait. Like you're either an imposter or you're not. And what this paper is trying to unpack is that you can actually experience imposter thoughts on some days and not other days. So all of the studies in this paper are trying to look at like imposter thoughts in the moment, imposter thoughts in the day, as opposed to, oh, I measured imposter thoughts in September and then I looked at what happened to you down the line a month, 2 months, 3 months later.
I think, just again, as a layperson, that makes total sense. I often find that people who report high levels of anxiety in the moment also are more creative when they're getting out of a jam, whether they're up against a deadline or, whether they're just trying to do their work and they're pushing themselves very hard. Most of the time, sometimes anxiety, right, can make you totally lock out and freeze.
So, what I'm hearing from you, and one thing that I've been thinking about is it probably matters how much progress you think you've made towards whatever it is that you're trying to work through. And so, my sort of theory is that if you think you've made a lot of progress, that potentially is going to put you more in that problem solving mode because you're like, okay, I just need to get through this like small bit. I have 20% left. Let me just get through that 20%. Let me channel my sort of imposter thoughts to get there and figure it out. As opposed to if you're thinking, oh no, like I have still so much to go. This is just not working for me. Then you're going to sort of double down, which is kind of what I heard you saying of like, when you're up against that deadline, you're like, oh, this is the final hour. Then you're going to sort of trigger and get into this sort of frenzy to get it done. I think it's possible. Wait, I love talking hypotheses. This is what I love doing.
Okay, but I'm going to layer one more
Do
thing.
it. I love it.
Perfectionism.
Okay, so one of the things that I'm also hearing from you, which I think is really typical, is we associate things like imposter phenomena and perfectionism, anxiety. We all assume they kind of glob on together. And I think sometimes that's true, right? We can think of, especially if we're thinking of people who are listening to this podcast, maybe myself, yourself. Uh, we're perfectionists. We're also potentially anxious people. We sometimes are a little neurotic. We are, sometimes experiencing some imposter thoughts. I think one of the things, though, that I caution people from thinking about is sort of thinking about yourself as all of those things all at once. That's when the negative well being sort of outcome is really going to sort of manifest. You're going to think about all the sort of negative emotions that we tend to associate with all of these different phenomena. And so a lot of my work, and I'm really glad you brought this up, is about really, really being clear about what each of these things are, right? So when I'm talking about neuroticism and that paper about how actually being neurotic is really great when you're inconsistently engaged at work, what I also do in my studies is I try to control for alternative explanations. So knock out some of the things that we might expect to also glob on. So to make that really concrete, for example, when we look at my workplace imposter thoughts papers, I always try to rule out, is this actually a story about self-esteem? Is this actually a story about self-monitoring, which is just you're someone who's really good at acting in the moment to appeal to the person in front of you? Is this actually you're just someone who's really concerned about self-presentation? You're just really monitoring what everybody's thinking about you and you want to make sure that you're always nailing it. And I think when you can do that, that's when you start to see all these functional things. The things that we think are bad can actually have some upside.
What does that look like in practice? You're in the moment. You're trying to meet a deadline. You're trying to get a presentation done.
I think in the moment, we tend to think of emotional reactions to be the first things that we experience. So you're going to have these fleeting emotions. I think the key is figuring out how you can work in a sort of yes and kind of space, right? Where, yes, I'm experiencing these emotions, but I also have this deadline. And so, can I almost put these emotions in a holding pattern while I sort of work through it and then kind of be able to take a deep breath at the end? It's not necessarily going to mean those emotions are going to completely go away. I also think it allows you to sort of feel them, but also proceed forward, right? And I think the reason I say this is even if we go back to that imposter thoughts paper that I told you about, where you become more other oriented, and that's kicked off by your self esteem or a drop in self esteem, you wouldn't be able to get there if you didn't have that drop in self esteem, which probably also makes you feel really bad, probably makes you feel anxious, probably distressed, probably a little bit sad. And so it's kind of this idea that sometimes those negative emotions can actually be really good propellers or we're pushing you where you need to go. There is this paper about sort of, it's a popular theory, which you might have heard about, which is like the dual tuning theory, that you need some positive, you need some negative, and it's sort of like toggling between them that allows you to get to some good outcomes.
That's right. That's right. You need to tear the muscle to grow.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't grow otherwise, right? If you're always in this comfortable spot, you're not really going to get to potentially where you need to go.
Right. Right. And I think practically what you're saying is a sense that will feel very familiar to my audience, which is you're pushing yourself to be the best. There's lots of factors that drive it, and maybe self-esteem and anxiety and all the things are part of it. But I also want people to make friends with their anxiety enough and their imposter feelings to be able to say, okay, I get it. I'm a banana. Onto the task at hand.
I love that. Yeah, it's not I really like this idea of becoming friends because kind of this idea of like pushing it down, that's not going to work, right? Like it's not going to work. We're pretty sophisticated, beings. We are going to have these thoughts, and in fact, probably if you suppress them, as we all know, they're going to come out exactly in the moment you don't want them to come out. And so I do think, yeah, it's this idea of like not suppressing, not necessarily replacing it with positivity that could be potentially toxic, but just being like, okay, I see it. It's happening, but we also got to keep moving forward. And I also want to acknowledge for the listeners here, and I'm sure we've experienced this too, that, you know, sometimes you're not going to get it right. And that's okay. And I think what's really important, especially when we think about work performance, for example, is that you're not often being evaluated on a single episode. People are thinking about you holistically. And people are not necessarily thinking about how many times you failed or what you think you failed as much as you are, right? We tend to have a negativity bias where the things that are bad sort of stick with us more than the things that are good. But when it comes to sort of performance reviews, that people are sort of sitting there and trying to think about, okay, what are the things that these people have nailed? What are the things that they haven't nailed, right? It's a little bit more balanced than we sort of give ourselves credit when we're thinking about how other people are going to evaluate us.
I personally love to have a little bit of a uniform. I like to mix it up with my wardrobe, but I always come back to staples that I know just look great. They're functional, they suit my frame. And my latest is my incredible crepe black trench coat from Quince. Quince makes it easy to refresh your wardrobe, but also find those sort of expensive looking, reliable, always chic staples. They're pieces that feel as good as they look because Quince uses premium materials like 100% European linen, organic cotton, and ultra soft denim. And my really expensive looking trench coat was $100. Their spring and summer lines like lightweight linen pants, dresses, and tops start at $30 and are effortless, breathable, and easy to wear on repeat. And that is Quince. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands because they work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen. So you're paying for quality and craftsmanship, not a brand markup. With my trench coat, the quality of the fabric, it's a beautiful black crepe, really surprised me. It's cut really well. It's cut actually long for me, which is amazing. So many pieces, I think, actually to save on the cost of fabric are cutting like shorter sleeves these days. It's beautiful. It looks like an expensive Italian trench coat, and it cost me $100, which I love. So refresh your every day with luxury you'll actually use. Head to quince.com/achiever and you'll get free shipping on your order and always 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's quince.com/achiever for free shipping and 365-day returns. QUINCE.com/achiever and enjoy. Is there any relationship that you've seen between making a mistake or having a shame or an experience of shame at work and then subsequent workplace imposter feelings?
So I have not looked at the relationship between what you would call sort of self-conscious emotions, so these guilt or shame, with workplace imposter thoughts. I do want to highlight that there is a researcher at Wharton, she's a professor, Becky Schomburg. She tends to look at the effects of these self-conscious emotions, and sometimes actually finds that they can have upsides. But she's also someone who's interested in, oh, wait, there's some good things that come from experiencing sometimes bad feelings. But let's play this out. Like, I'm curious, okay, if you're someone who's experiencing, what would the relationship between shame and workplace imposter thoughts be? Do you have thoughts as I sort of mull it over, or like,
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example from my own life. And of course, anxiety underpins a lot of it. I think that I had a really, really shaming work experience when I was like in my mid 20s that really took me down a few pegs. I was sort of publicly shamed. I do believe for me that has subsequently triggered imposter feelings. Again, as you say, not in every situation. Sometimes I'm like, I know this cold, I got this. But in certain situations that trigger me a little bit, the past trauma really comes up, and I am in a place of total imposter, total doubt, total fear, frankly.
do you think it's because you're thinking about that moment from your 20s?
I can feel it. I can like taste it.
You're like, it's coming back to me. I think what is really interesting about that story is that probably the audience that you're interacting with in the moment does not know about that experience in your 20s, right? And so I think this is actually where, what it's making me think of is some people have asked me, like, who's right when you have imposter thoughts? Is it that you're right, that you're not as smart as other people think you are? Or is it that they're probably right, that, you're smarter than you think you are? And what I tend to think is actually it's the latter, exactly for the story that you just said. When we're thinking about, okay, other people think I'm at 10 in terms of my confidence. I don't think I'm terrible. I don't think I'm like a 2, but maybe I think I'm more like a 7, right? So there's a gap there. But what makes me think that maybe I'm a 7? It's because I'm thinking about, oh, when I was 23 in consulting and I didn't nail that model, or when I was in grad school going through my comprehensive exams and I didn't know the answer to question number 2, right? I'm sitting there, or when I'm sort of working on a paper and I'm like, oh, reviewer 2 thinks this terrible thing about paragraph number 5 in the paper, whatever it might be, right? But nobody else is seeing that. And for sure, an audience is probably not seeing all of those things. Maybe they know about one thing because maybe I complained about reviewer 2 as I was working on my paper. But they don't know about what happened to me in consulting. They don't know what happened in grad school. What it sort of brings to mind is I actually think people are a little bit savvier about what matters than we are about ourselves. People are thinking about, okay, what capabilities do I see Maura displaying? What has she displayed within the last 3 months of me knowing her? And then saying, oh, I think she can do this. This is why I'm giving you that task. This is why I'm putting you in this position, because I think you can do it. You have those capabilities. On the other hand, you as potentially the acceptor of this opportunity, you might be like, well, actually, you don't know about that time I was 25 and this thing happened, right? But maybe they don't need to know. Maybe they know that you've grown, and we're not sort of counting on this fact that we've grown and we've learned and we've developed skills that allow us to sort of master those opportunities that maybe we didn't nail the first time around.
I like how you differentiate between the way that imposter syndrome is positioned a lot in the popular culture as being really kind of a fear state, and the reality that you find, which is different, or the reality that it was initially intended. Actually, do you want to say something about that?
The way that this was studied the first time around is it was studied among a group of women. And it was a bunch of actually high achieving women. So women who were in graduate school, or pre-professional women, or professional women, who kept talking about this idea of, I think other people overestimate my competence. And because it was a qualitative study, these participants would also report their feelings, right? So you could also see indications of a fear of being found out. You could also see indications that they said, oh, but people find me charming. So actually that initial paper is really, really rich. I think this really sort of took off actually more in the popular press than it did in academic literature. And when we talk in sort of popular discourse, we're a little bit less careful in our language. And that's totally fine, right? You kind of get what I'm saying. I say feeling, it might be thinking. I kind of think about them the same way, like feeling imposter thoughts, thinking imposter thoughts. They all kind of have the same sort of vibe. But as a result, I think there was kind of what I call construct drift. So this idea that we started attaching more and more superfluous meaning to this idea of what imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome is. And so as a result, we sort of forgot about what is that initial ingredient that's making you potentially worried that you're going to find out, making you think you don't belong, which tend to be terms that people use as synonymous with this phenomenon. And it was always about this idea that other people think you're smart, right? It's not that people who don't think they're smart at all experience this, right? It's people who think that they're pretty smart. They've gotten some indication that other people think they're great. They're the ones reporting that. And I think that's really important too, because when you also look at popular discourse, who are the people reporting having these thoughts? They tend to be really successful. Even Albert Einstein is someone who people have said has had imposter thoughts. And he is the genius guy. When we think of genius, we think Albert Einstein, right? So it kind of has this idea of maybe we're not getting it all right here. And it's really important to become more precise in our language. And this is part of the reason why I keep using this terminology of imposter thoughts, because what I'm trying to do is sort of get us back to the heart of the concept, get us back all on the same page. When I'm talking about this phenomenon, what am I talking about? I'm talking about this overestimation of confidence, not talking about all those other stuff that have been wrapped up that can accompany it, right? So sometimes people think of like kind of what we talked about earlier, perfectionism, anxiety, self-esteem. All of these things probably glob together, but they're not the same thing. And to assume that they're the same thing means we're painting the same lived experience for everybody, which is not actually the case.
Last question is, imposter syndrome is controversial. There's race and gender criticisms of it. There's an argument that, it's systemic. So why put it on the individual person's feelings to figure out? And I'm curious, given your research, if you just had anything you wanted to say about that discourse.
There's so much to say there. So the first thing that I want to highlight is I've actually never found gendered effects. And this, I'm not actually the first person to say this. So actually there's even a systematic review by Dr. Bravata and colleagues that have also found that this is not a particularly gendered thing. What do I think might be going on there? I think it's possible that women are more likely to admit it. They're more likely to talk about it because we're more conditioned to sort of think and sort of claim this and say, oh my gosh, we have this and we need to work on it. So I want to sort of first say that. And then along those lines, also acknowledge that I agree that one thing that really seems to be missing from the narrative, and this is actually, starting to change, there are researchers working on this, is we tend to think about it in a very individualistic perspective. So even when I say, previous work has studied this as a trait, that means it's a personality thing, which means it's innate. But actually, me as well as others argue that this is actually often situationally triggered. So one that has been talked about, but people seem to forget, is actually promotions can trigger this. You get promoted, you have a new set of responsibilities. That's something other people have put on you. And so to suggest that it's all on the individual to manage it, I completely agree that that's not the right takeaway, right? That suggests that this is not something that's situationally induced, which it is. So completely agree on that front. One thing I want to say about the racial front is I actually have a forthcoming review piece on this, where a lot of people tend to associate this with marginalized groups. But I think what's actually going on there is it might be actually a conflation between imposter thoughts and a lack of belonging. So often when we talk about it from marginalized groups, it's actually not that they think other people are overestimating them. It's actually that they think other people are
Underestimating them.
So they're in the room, but people are like, why are you in the room? You're clearly not as competent, right? That's a very different story. And I think to suggest that again as something that people who are marginalized always experience might not actually capture their lived experience, and also might actually be completely off the mark when maybe we should be studying belonging and actually the stereotypes we might have of others and how people are internalizing those stereotypes, right? I think there's sometimes this appeal of imposter syndrome, right? It has the word imposter. Imposter is sexy. It's like cool term, right? So you want to call everything, oh, we probably have imposter syndrome. And I think that's part of what's going on in popular discourse. And so I'm really excited by these researchers and these practitioners who are starting to say, hey, this might be actually something that's situationally induced. We might have sort of systems set in place to make certain people feel like imposters. And then what I'd like to add to it is like when we say imposter, let's start distinguishing between those people who are imposters because they think they don't belong, which is them belonging, versus imposters because they think people overestimate them and they're waiting to be found out.
That's it for this week's show. If you like the show, follow us and tell your friends. And please leave us a review. It really helps the anxious achiever get found by people just waiting for our content. I'm your host, Maura Aarons-Mele. Lots more to come in the next episode.